Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode with Mark Bunn. Now, I love Mark because the things that Mark talks about as a speaker is a little bit different than what you hear when it comes to productivity, mindfulness, how to be a high achiever, how to have really good high functioning habits, because it's really the combination that, and Mark, I'm going to let Mark share it in a second, about bringing the Eastern philosophy into the Western lifestyle, and how do you do it all in and amongst everything that's happening with technology and everything like that. So I'm really excited to bring Mark today because he's got such a unique philosophy on how to have balance and how to achieve things. So Mark gets brought in. He's one of the most in-demand speakers across Australia and internationally. And once he gets in, you'll quite quickly understand why that is, because he's so unique and special. And he just makes massive transformations. And people ask Mark to come back again and again because of the results that he gets from the organizations that he's working with. So Mark, thank you so much for making time. It looks absolutely stunning where you are today.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Great to be here, Carrie.
Awesome. Well, look, Mark, what my intention today is we have one of the most common questions we get asked is, can we have a little taster? Can we get a little sample of what your talk is like, what you actually do with people? So I'm going to try to extract as much of that as I can out of you today. And one of the things that we talked about just a second ago before we jumped on was the daily habits of a high achiever. And I think all of us really want to know, how do you create high achievers in the workplace? And can you share a little bit about how you actually are creating high achievers that stick in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really the answer is very simple. My background was in AFL football, so it's very much around performance and well-being. And then, as you touched on, my journey from there went into the Eastern traditions of health. And my philosophy has always been, let's look at people that achieve high performance, they're high achievers, and see what they do and see what the common traits are between them. And so the background initially was around health and looking at long living cultures, traditions that have enjoyed really fantastic health, all the things that in our Western culture we want today: good energy, really good sleep, to wake up fresh and clear. And then combining that wisdom, this age-old wisdom that we know works in terms of a health and well-being perspective, and combining that with what works in a busy business environment, and looking at particularly a lot of the research from Tim Ferriss, who I'm sure many of your listeners will know, who's really just a productivity hack, and he loves getting in and looking at high performers, particularly business people and entrepreneurs, but also athletes, artists, and seeing what their common habits are. And it's a really great marriage. It's really interesting that although they're focused on business success and productivity, they actually do a lot of the same practices that these healthy, long-living individuals do. So that's really what I focus on. Don't get into the research about what might work and all the latest fads. Just look at what does work and what high achievers do already, and really just copy those.
And what do you think are the three key things, Mark, that high achievers have in common? You've mentioned one of the things a lot of people come and ask you about is mindfulness. So what does that mean to you? Is that a part of their three habits?
Yeah, really interesting you should ask that, Carrie, because the latest research, and particularly what Tim Ferriss has been doing in his latest book, The Tools of Titans, which I now use and talk about in my keynote, The Daily Habits of High Achievers. He suggests that the number one most common trait between all high achievers is a daily practice of meditation, that they take some time, usually in the early morning before the busyness of the day starts, to close the eyes, to meditate, to transcend, have that mindful start to the day, so that they come out into activity. One, they're fresher, they're clearer, and they're very crystal clear about what their priorities are. as you would know and business people know, we're just so overwhelmed with what we need to do to be successful today. There's so many things we can do. And what really distinguishes these high achievers from those who are busy but not necessarily productive is that they're able to focus on and do the most important things. And this meditation practice early in the morning is key to that. The other thing they do early morning, which is interesting, is they exercise. And the research shows that 75% compliance when we have exercise as part of our morning routine, as opposed to waiting till the end of the workday. So high achievers, they wake up early and they get that 1 or 2 hours in the early morning before the busyness starts to meditate, exercise, and plan their day. So they're crystal clear on their priorities and what the key things they need to do by the end of the day to achieve the success in their work environment.
So how do you actually turn an organization around like that? Because, not everybody is going to get prepared before they come into work.
Exactly.
Especially your common workers, or, everybody's being busy, and they have kids and they have life. So how do you actually get people to integrate this?
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, this is where some other really interesting research comes into it, because you're exactly right. It's all very well to have the theories and the principles, but for the everyday worker who's, they've got family and they're overwhelmed with their workload, we really need to make things bite-sized and chunk them down to make it very simple. And that's what I believe is one of my real benefits to any organization, is I really chunk things down to make it easy and simple. And some really interesting research by a guy called Shawn Achor has come out just over the last few years. And it's around happiness, and a keynote that I talk about, the happiness revolution. And Shawn has shown that rather than this traditional approach of just trying to be more productive, to get on top of stress, to be more mindful, if we can take just 2 minutes out of our day that anyone can do early in the day to do 3 activities, and they're around creating what he calls a happiness advantage first, because our traditional mentality is that we have to succeed. We have to get the job done, meet our KPIs, and then we'll be happy. And his research in 45 different countries over the last couple of decades shows categorically that we've got the formula back to front. If we can spend just 2 minutes a day doing activities such as gratitude exercises, like getting people just to focus on 2 or 3 things that they're grateful for in their day. The fact they've got a job, the fact they've got a nice family, a roof over their head. Journaling about something that's been positive in their last 24 hours. Because we know from brain science, by default, we tend to focus on the negative. And I go into many organizations, and you deal with a lot too, and there's very often this pervasive negativity. It's low morale, everyone's bitching in the coffee room, and we get, by default, we focus on what's wrong, what we haven't done on the to-do list, what we still have yet to achieve. And so simply switching that, even for 30 seconds a minute, by focusing on an achievement, something positive, whether in a professional or a personal setting, can help switch our brains to start to see the positive more, create more endorphins, and we actually feel happier and more productive. And the third one that Shawn did in his research was just to start the day with one random or conscious act of kindness. And what he would get people to do is their first email of the day would be to someone in their network, either at work or at home, simply praising or thanking them for something they have done. And those 3 things that anyone can do in 2 minutes at the start of their day was shown to increase productivity 31%.
Wow.
For some people, 37% increase in sales. And everyone is in sales, I believe, whether we're face-to-face sales, but it's about influence. And I always use the example of people going into a retail shop. If the person in the shop, they're half asleep and they're, really don't want you in the shop and they're grumpy, how likely are we to buy from that person? Not very much. But you ring someone up on the phone or you meet them and they're happy and they're laughing, then we're more likely to buy or be influenced by that person. And thirdly, 19% increase or in speed and accuracy in job tasks. More resilience, more energy, a whole bunch of research. Basically, every business outcome, his research showed, was improved by doing that 2-minute activity at the start of the day. So we often combine these components. If it's a group of really high-level executives that are already pretty successful and efficient, we maybe focus a bit more on those daily habits of high achievers. If it's an employee group that maybe the organization's suggesting there is a lot of stress, there's negativity, then we might start with some of these other happiness type promotion activities to sort of get over that hump, as you mentioned. So we mix and match.
And what are you finding, Mark? What do you find are the common problems inside of most organizations?
So the big thing I've found over the last 6 to 12 months, because I love to research organizations and pick the brains of executives, management, workers themselves, is a combination of overwhelm in terms of work tasks, which is stress, obviously, but combined with the demands of technology. And it's creating a few key problems. One, which almost everyone listening, I'm sure, will have some inkling of, is insomnia, or inability to get good quality sleep. And what this results in is obviously waking up, we don't have energy, we're not clear mentally to set proper tasks and prioritize. But also related to this is just a lack of motivation, okay? And this is key. And one of my fundamental teachings is that we can have the best strategies in the world around leadership, managing our teams, being more productive. But if we're waking up and our workers are waking up tired, haven't had a good night's sleep, we're relying on 6 cups of coffee to get us through the day, mentally not clear, then basically every area of work performance declines. So the big one we're focusing on a lot at this stage is sleep. Some real key factors about how to get people a good quality sleep. And also at the other end of the day, people are reporting that they're really struggling with what we used to think of work-life balance, that we now know from research from people like Dr. Adam Fraser, who's done some great research at Deakin, is it's more about how we transition from the end of the workday and not taking that stress home to our loved ones. And what we can do around that transition in terms of mindfulness and some little really simple practical things to transition so we go home and we can actually enjoy our home life, which is critical for workers to refresh, rejuvenate, and start the next day powering on again.
And how do you find that is received? Because it seems like, that doesn't really have to do with going to work. So it has to do with what they do before they go to work and what they do, maybe in a couple minutes at work and what they do when they leave. So, how does that get received, especially inside of an organization, or how does a CEO make sense to actually integrate this into their staff?
Well, it's interesting because they actually really like it because they're not perceiving that it's taking up these chunks of work time. It's actually just things that people are doing outside of work. From here, I actually fly up to Port Douglas to do the top 100 achievers from Suncorp Bank. And the brief for me was that they want something that they can give to their workers that's not work related. They don't want to be seen to be trying to make them better at work, more productive. They want to give them something to help their personal lives, because the understanding now is that if we can help people personally feel better about themselves, to sleep better, to get some exercise, to be more mindful, then that obviously will translate to work. So although they're doing it before work and at the end of the work day, that means they're turning up to work feeling better, feeling happier, boosts morale in the workplace. And then at the end of the day, if they're able to transition properly, so they're not taking that stress from work to home, then they're able to rejuvenate and feel better at home, so that then they're not resenting the fact that work's making them stressed. So it's really a win-win, and organizations are really loving that approach.
And how are the staff continuing to integrate it? So like after you leave, I know, there's this crazy statistic that like only 3% of people are only really the people who actually make any changes. So, with your work, I know a lot of people bring you back, and I can't imagine they wouldn't if it wasn't actually something that was sticking and that the people enjoyed. So how are you finding the on-flow effect? Do you have a higher success rate after you deliver a motivational talk, or you actually go and integrate into the workplace? What are you finding?
Really great question, because I know, and you would know, organizations, that's the big one for them. They make a big investment for a speaker or a trainer, facilitator. They get a great result for the first few weeks, but what's the real buy-in 6 months later? So I do two things. And so we have a program called Healthy People, Healthy Business. That's basically a 12-month online program that we gift in usually for most organizations, or they can purchase, so that when people leave the 1 hour session or the half day or full day session, they actually get me for 12 months. So it's little tips just once a week about different aspects of work-life balance, meditation, how to have a healthy breakfast when you're busy, how to get more exercise into your day if you're starting work early, finishing late, all these little things that just carry on. So they got that support, and they can get that implementation for basically a year after the session.
And they're using it, aren't they?
Yeah.
Like you're actually tell me about the feedback you're getting, because I've heard about it. Like people are actually using it, aren't they?
Well, they not only use it, but we get emails a week after we send it out, and they say, "Oh, Mark, loving your tips, but can I send it to my niece or my co-workers weren't at the event? Can we send it to them? Can I use it from my team, particularly for managers and execs, because we do a lot with them? If they get it, can I use it for all my team? They'd love this stuff." So yeah, no, it's been really phenomenally successful. And that, again, because it's simple, it's just a really short email. It's like they read it in 20, 30 seconds, but it just gets something in their brain that they can focus on for the week. And then the next week it's something else. And yeah, they love it. And it's really, really, really powerful.
And Mark, what do you think is the secret or the special thing that's actually creating a change inside of the organization? Like, what is it, if there was only one thing that people would just pay attention to or slow down and do that makes the greatest change, what would that be?
Well, when you were asking the question, what was coming to me was that I talk a lot about, it'll seem a strange term, but natural law. And I'm sure this wasn't the answer you were thinking of when you asked the question, Carrie. But
no, but that's okay.
Yeah, the feedback I get is why organizations get so much out of my presentations is that it just makes so much sense. Today we're so overwhelmed and people are so overloaded with particularly health information, but business and performance, it's just too much, and it's confusing, and often it's contradictory. And so what I talk about from these Eastern traditions and the old sort of Eastern medical systems is just that we as humans are designed to live in tune with certain laws of nature. And that's how long-living cultures have done it for forever. And so just having some simple wisdoms, which we talk about, early morning sunlight, makes such a difference to workers' mindset, their mood, their positivity, their performance. So something you can do in 30 seconds that most people often don't because they work indoors, they've got artificial lighting, okay, makes such a difference. So people hear that, and when I talk about the importance of sunlight and what it does to the brain and the neurotransmitters in the brain and the hormonal systems, it just resonates with them. It makes sense. When I talk about the fact we get home at the end of the night, and I usually have a big sparkler, I use lots of props, And the sparkler is the digestive fire that cooks our food. And I'm outside now and the sun's coming up to midday. It's at its peak. And what we've known through these traditional cultures is at the middle of the day, the sun is at its peak, the fire, the energy, and so is our digestive fire. This is when we as humans are designed to have our main meal. And it's interesting because the second most common habit in high performers, Tim Ferriss found, is that they don't have breakfast, or they have a very minimal breakfast, which is one of my health teachings. Most long-living people, and they get up, they have a very light breakfast, and it's at lunch that they have their main meal of the day. So high achievers take that break in the middle of the day and have a decent lunch. And at the end of the day, when the sun's setting, the little sparkler, the fire, is going out. And whereas most of us come home, we have the big heavy meal, the steak and the chips and the dessert, and we catch up with the family. And then we go to bed, and it's like there's this whole 3-course meal in our bellies, and we wonder why we can't sleep, or we sleep and we wake up heavy and tired and lethargic. And so these are just some examples of these age-old simple principles that when people hear it, it just makes so much sense to them. So, and they remember those things for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years after a talk. And so I think it's these wisdoms, age-old wisdoms, that really help me get really good results for organizations, because it just makes sense and it's true, and they know it's true.
It sounds like it's a lot about slowing down. Like everybody's rushing around crazily, and you make people just stop and start paying attention to the little things. Yeah. And that's why it's making such a big difference.
Beautifully put. Yeah. And again, I think if people actually research high performers, high achievers more, they'll actually find that most of them are less busy than those who don't achieve high success. Derek Sivers is another American, very high achiever, excuse me, and does some great podcasts with Tim Ferriss. And he made the same point, that people assume that he's always busy, but he's not busy because he's in control of his time. And that's what high achievers are. They're in control of their time so that they can focus and do what really needs to be done. And there's actually a whole movement called the slow movement. You know, we now have slow cooking, but soon we're going to hear about slow business. And another keynote I do now is called The Future of Healthy, Happy, High Performance Businesses. And this is part of it, that it's really about slowing down, not in terms of the results we get, but it's like the eye of the hurricane in the Eastern traditions. If we can create that mindfulness, that settledness, that clarity, then we actually get more done in a real sense, even though we're not busy like the hamster on the treadmill. So
I agree. It's amazing. It's like I was just out last week and I just told everybody, just slow down, just focus on the one thing, because the one thing will make the biggest difference, won't it? I mean, absolutely. And what do you see from that? I mean, you see it with far larger quantities of people. So like, what do you see when you actually have people just slow down? What's the impact, not just on their personal life, but inside of the organization? I mean, you mentioned 31% increase in productivity, but in your own experience, you know, what are you hearing in 3 to 6 months' time as a result of the paying attention and the mindfulness of the natural laws?
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I get the emails, and the emails are that I get so much more done, which seems counterintuitive. Slowing down, but they always remark, whether it's the senior manager or the worker on the floor, I now get so much more done. And the other thing is that their family life improves, which is really interesting, because the stress is not building up at work. They're actually getting what they're hired to do. And this is where communication often comes in with their senior manager or the executive or people up the chain, so that they actually crystal clear know what their KPIs are. And it's not always that clear. But once they know that, we then supplement that with the simple practical steps. And another one I love to use is Tim Ferriss's do the 2 most important things you need to do that day to achieve whatever success is for you, whether it's a KPI, whether it's some goal. Do the 2 most important things before 11 o'clock in the morning. And when we do that, procrastination is cut in half. We feel so much better because the big things are done, and then the rest of the day is an actual breeze. And so when people do that, and that's often one I finish a keynote with because it leaves a really powerful message, they love it. And that's the thing. I get so much more done. And it's not that they're actually getting more done. They're just getting the really important things done. And that's the key difference.
I love that. I was just about to ask you, if there was, one thing that, after listening to this episode, like what would be if there was just one thing that, if people fast forwarded right to the end and repeated this over and over again. I know I do that. And a lot of the people that are watching this are high achievers. They do the same thing. So if there was one thing that they could remember and integrate on a daily basis based on what you show people and do with people, what would that one thing be?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to reframe slightly and do 2. I'm being greedy. But it's like 2 sides of a coin. You need both. One, as we actually started the session with, would be to meditate. So the research is clear. The most common habit for high performers, high achievers is a daily practice of meditation. I'm lucky. I've done TM, transcendental meditation for like 25, 26 years back in my sporting days. So it's just become a habit for me, but I know that's more difficult for others. But just whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, making that time to learn a practice to begin with and just make that part, particularly of the morning routine, and then ideally 5-10 minutes in the transition at the end of the day. But the second one is reconfirming what we just finished with, is that once we've transcended, we're clear, we're settled in mind, then how can we be most productive in activity? And stories are so powerful. One of the stories I share was about a CEO in the early 1980s, so well over 30 years ago. And he had a salesperson coming into him, showing him all these glossy brochures about how he could improve the performance and productivity of all his staff. And he cut him off after a few minutes, and he opened his bottom drawer of his desk and he pulled out all these other glossy brochures from all the other salespeople that have been coming in for the last few months. And he says, I've got a better idea. Rather than you telling me about all your great, research and what you're going to do for my organization, why don't you actually tell me one of your strategies, your tips? I will personally implement it for a month, and then we'll see the results. And the salesperson said, sure. And what he told him, he says, I want you at the end of each working day, or first thing when you get up before the day starts. Back in then they had pieces of paper that you would write on, and I want you to write down the 6 most important things you need to do the next day to achieve success in your business. And then I want you to prioritize them from 1 to 6. And then when you start your day, you are to start on number 1. And the only rule is that you cannot move to number 2 until you have completed number 1, unless there's something that stops you from doing that. That's the only condition. After 1 month, that CEO wrote a check for $25,000 to that salesperson, because that one tip absolutely transformed his own business success. And that's what I leave people with. It's all about focus. Meditation helps us focus, but we need to combine that with effective activity. Find out what the absolute key activities to drive our individual businesses, our work performance, and do those things first and foremost.
Wow, Mark, that was so good. Thank you so much for making time, especially in the middle of your busy work schedule. That was awesome. Thank you so, so much. So, Mark, I'll have a link on the bottom of our episode and on the video and on our podcast as well. But for the people that are listening, where should they go to connect with you, to subscribe to what you do? Where's the best place to go to work with you?
The best place is just my website, which is markbunn, BUNN.com.au. And you'll find everything on there. There's a speaker page for events. If you've got an event or conference coming up, you can get links to these articles about the future of health, a whole bunch of resources on the blog. And of course, you can just email us at any time, and we'll be delightful to have a chat with you and to see how we can help your organization. So thank you so much for having me, Carrie, and keep up your great work too.
Thanks so much, Mark. We'll see you soon.
Okay.